Drew straightened a box of cookies on the wooden dining table and placed a stack of napkins next to them. He swiped his hands across the table and peered at his palm. Satisfied, Drew glanced at his watch. 7 minutes had passed since he had gone outside and placed the open house sign on the swell. Having arrived 2 hours before, Drew had peered into each room, memorizing what they looked like, and even counting the steps he took from one side of the house to the other. He wanted to ensure he knew the house inside and out, since this was the first open house. Standing beside the table and staring at the open front door, Drew felt good about the house. It was a new build in a decent location. He pictured a young couple looking for a starter home. Perhaps they owned a medium-sized dog. Having compared it with the other homes in the area, it was the newest one. The previous house in its place had burned down a couple of years ago. Drew shuddered, recalling the news article he had read about what had happened with the house. He peered at his watch again. 15 minutes had passed. Walking out of the kitchen, Drew fluffed one of the decorative pillows from the sofa. He noticed an older man walk by, who glanced at the open house sign and then at the house. Drew instinctually waved, yet the man didn't seem to notice him at the window. Setting the pillow back in its place, he stiffened as the hair on the back of his neck rose. Gradually, Drew turned around and peered into the open kitchen and the dining room beyond. He half expected to see someone standing there, yet it was empty. Focusing on a spot, Drew stepped closer. Between the bar counter and the fridge was a dark area where the sunlight from the windows didn't reach. He stared into it, seeing the darkness change within. Drew shook his head and made a mental note to stop reading articles about homes that have either been considered haunted, cursed, or unlivable due to unnatural circumstances. Footsteps tapping on metal caused Drew to jump and clutch at his chest. He spun towards the front threshold and saw a wide-eyed couple half in and half out of the house. "Oh, you startled me. I'm sorry," Drew said, and he raised his hand. "I'm Drew, the realtor for this lovely home." The couple each took Drew's hand. As he shook, Drew noticed their clothes and body language, though the way the man glanced around with narrowed eyes gave Drew the impression that he might be a tough sell. Drew decided to amp up his charm and led them to the kitchen where the cookies lay. Upstairs, Drew felt he had mostly won the couple over. They seemed to keep a perpetual smile on their faces. Stepping into the master bedroom, Drew hesitated as he noticed the small walk-in closet doors were open. The couple walked in, unaware that Drew had paused in his spiel. He recalled making his rounds in the master bedroom and closing the closet doors. He wanted to open them whenever a potential buyer was with him. The couple were at the window, admiring the lawn view, as Drew stared at the swirling void. Sweat began to prickle on his temples, and he could feel his heart against his chest. He felt someone watching him from inside the closet. There was a flicker in the darkness, and Drew blinked, unsure what he saw. Another flicker, and it stayed, dancing in the middle of the space. It began to expand, and Drew could feel the heat drift towards him. His body stiffened. He felt a hand on his shoulder. "Oh, Jesus, I apologize for my jumpiness again," Drew said as the couple watched him. "I keep thinking of something that happened outside of here." The woman headed towards the closet, and Drew approached, compelled to stop her. She flipped his wall switch, and light flooded the inside, revealing a space with empty bars and a shelving. Drew was alone again. The couple had left with his business card and promised to reach out, yet he sensed it wouldn't happen. There was a look on their faces as they waved goodbye, as if they felt unease. Sitting on a bar stool at the kitchen counter, he recalled what he had read about the previous owner. The owner was a man named Earl Tanner, who was in his early 50s. He had lived in the house for about 20 years and was a construction worker. He had no wife or children and had no roommates. Keeping to himself, none of the neighbors believed that he would be the type to commit a heinous crime. The police were called in when a neighbor had heard a cry for help. The police were suspicious that it was a child that was abducted a few months prior. Surrounding the house, the police confronted the owner, and as they attempted to knock the door down, the house exploded in flames. 3 police officers were injured. Construction crews and demolitionists took over as they removed detritus to get to the basement. A child's voice could be heard as the pile of wood and brick thinned. It took 2 days to find a young girl who was curled up in her PJs, clutching a stuffed bear. She was rushed to the hospital with 2nd to 3rd degree burns on most of her body. The firefighters found what remained of Earl, a charred corpse holding a lighter in his crumbling hand. The snick of a lighter brought Drew's attention back to the newly built house. Getting up from the stool, he peered into the dining and living rooms. No one had entered the house, and it was quiet out on the sidewalk. 2 snicks, as if someone was having trouble getting the flame to start. This time it was from the kitchen pantry, merely a foot away from where Drew was standing. Drew hesitated and peered back at the entrance, hoping someone would walk in. He struggled with a swallow and gradually walked to the pantry door. Taking hold of the handle, he thought about whether he should open it fast or slow. Drew yanked the door open. In the shadows, he could make out empty metal shelving. He let out a shaky breath and dropped his gaze to the floor. A trap door lay dusty and cracked along the edges. Drew frowned, recalling that he had never noticed a basement door in the floor plan. It occurred to him that it most likely was the same basement where the little girl was kept. A shudder took hold of him. "Excuse me," a voice rasped. Drew hopped in place and turned to see an older woman standing in the living room. She wore a flowy tunic with capris and had her graying hair in a loose bun. Her narrow face was lined with age and blotted with sunspots. "Well, hello. Sorry I had my back to you. I was checking the closet," Drew said, approaching the woman. "It seems like there was something in the closet you didn't like to see," the woman said. Drew giggled nervously and extended his hand out to introduce himself. "I'm Lola. I used to live in this neighborhood. As a matter of fact, I lived next door." "You did? How long ago?" "If you're asking whether I was here when that bastard kidnapped that poor child, then yes, I was around. As a matter of fact, I was the one that called the police," Lola said, placing her hands on her hip. Drew and Lola sat in the living room with cups full of coffee in hand. He faced the pantry, eyeing it, almost hoping that the noise would return so he wouldn't be alone hearing it. Lola sipped on her coffee, her thin lips pruning over the edge of the mug. It seemed as if she were waiting for Drew to say something. "You say that you were the one that called the police?" Drew asked. "Yes, I heard her calling out. At that time, the 2-floor house was built with a basement that was mostly underground. There was a small window that was covered with duct tape that was part of the basement," Lola said, placing her mug down on the coffee table. "On one side, the duct tape had peeled off. I told her that I was going to get help, and I'm pretty sure you know what happened next." Drew nodded. "I bet you don't tell your clients about that." "Of course not. This house would take forever to sell with that kind of history, even though it is completely a new build." Drew watched Lola, her gaze combing over the interior of the house. He wondered if he should tell her what he had been seeing, yet he didn't believe in himself. He gripped the coffee mug, his lips barely grazing the rim. "This house, even though it's new, has bad mojo. I'm pretty sure it's haunted," Lola said, helping Drew make up his mind. "I think so too," Drew said, recounting what had happened earlier, peering at the closet between sentences. Lola bobbed her head, her coffee forgotten. Drew was about to place his mug down when the flicking sound returned. It startled him, causing his remaining coffee to slosh. Lola stared at Drew, her eyes wide. She stood up, her head tilted to the side like a dog. Another flick, and Lola was on the hunt. Drew was surprised at Lola's curiosity about finding the sound. He hesitated before getting up and following her. A third flick led Lola to the pantry. "It's coming from down there," Lola said, pointing at the trapdoor. You know, maybe I should call it a day. I haven't been getting that many people in, Drew said, shrugging. You're right. You should close up shop here so we can find where that sound is coming from. I meant we should leave and maybe I should never return here. I know what you meant. Don't you want to sell this house? I'm not sure anymore. If you say it's got bad mojo, then it's probably not sellable. If this is like any other horror movie, then we should go see what the spirit wants. Give it to it, and all would be over, Lola said, reaching for the trapdoor. I don't think this is a good idea, Drew said, bouncing on his heels. I don't even watch horror movies. They scare me. Then I'll go. What? Why would you do that? It's not your problem. Well, I'm curious, Lola said, the trapdoor propped open. And I happen to like horror movies. Drew peered into the gloom of the space beyond the trapdoor and noticed a rotting staircase about 6 feet into the basement. He blinked rapidly, imagining what it was like for the poor little girl. Grasping at the railing, Drew followed Lola, swatting at cobwebs as he went. The comforting light from above gradually faded as they reached the bottom. Lola found a light switch with a dangling rope and pulled. The light bulb popped. Drew almost ran up the staircase, but instead clutched at his chest, his breathing ragged. Darn, I can hardly see anything, Lola said. Drew could see her silhouette as she turned in place. Glancing towards the trapdoor's entrance, he heard the flick, and a light grazed his face. Drew sensed Lola backing up, stepping into him. A lone flame floated in the darkness. A face appeared next to the flame, wearing a grimace. Drew's mouth dropped open. Who are you? Lola asked, her voice shaking slightly. I'm Earl. What the hell are you doing in my house? This is not your house anymore. You burnt it down, don't you remember? Lola said. The flame became larger, and Drew could see Earl. He wore faded mechanic overalls with a name tag that was half ripped from his breast pocket, and he was holding a lighter. Earl was scratching his head as if he was confused. He peered into the gloom behind him. Where is Chelsea? He asked. You mean the girl you kidnapped? Drew said, anger taking over his fear. Earl grunted. After the fire, she was rescued, Lola said. Earl stomped his feet. Lola and Drew took a step back. She was mine. She is gone. There's nothing you could do. You're dead, Drew said. Earl stiffened and stared at Drew. Dead? Yes, Lola said, her backside touching Drew. I died in the fire? Drew and Lola nodded in unison. Earl stared at the flame that bobbed between his two fingers. A long moment passed, and Drew wondered if he should speak. Earl took the lighter and brought it to his face. Drew gasped as the flames took over Earl's body. He didn't thrash or drop to the ground, but stood in place, watching Drew and Lola. Lola had placed a hand over her mouth, her body leaning away. Drew expected to smell burning flesh, yet mold and wood decay were the only smells that hung in the air. The fire reached a crescendo, billowing to the top of the basement, and then it snuffed out, as if a giant had blown on it. Drew and Lola watched from across the street under a maple tree, a couple entering the house with a little girl of about 3 years old. A U-Haul truck was parked on the street near the house, with movers going to and forth from the back of the truck. The for sale sign had been removed a couple of weeks ago when his replacement had successfully sold the house. Well, even with your effort in condemning the house, it was still sold, Lola said. I tried, Drew said, shrugging his shoulders. Do you think Earl is gone? He added. I hope so, Lola said, and turned away from the house. Drew peered back at the house and noticed through the living room window a tall candle on the kitchen counter, and for a brief second he thought he saw it light up. Thank you for listening to the Chillingly Bizarre podcast. For bonus content, check out chillinglybizarre.com. This was Season 2, Episode 13, titled Open House, and it was written by JDW. The episode was narrated by JDW. All characters are voiced by JDW. Credits go to freesound.org and its following contributors: RPU1, Unfa, Esperar, Read Only, Zmobi, Kill Baby, Gingy, Lipbell Learning, Jamie Orpen, Ties Wichnen, 121053699, Kyles, and My Inner Will. Please leave a review on the Spotify app or anywhere else you listen to that podcast.